Breaking tonight, Donald Trump making some serious campaign changes in an attempt to lock up the Republican nomination for president. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Just days after Donald Trump lost the Wisconsin primary to rival Ted Cruz, a brand new poll from the Associated Press defines the challenge for the general election. Right now, nearly 7 in 10 Americans have an unfavorable opinion of Donald Trump. And that includes whites, blacks, and Latinos, men and women, and more. The survey, not more than men and women. That's just all there is, just those two. The survey sampled voters from across the country. Even before this poll, however, a series of reports today suggested the Trump campaign is getting serious about building more support, about getting ready for policy speeches, and trying to win more support in Washington. They're hiring more political pros as well to help with the delegate battle. We've got the campaign trail covered for you tonight with Newt Gingrich, Charles Krauthammer, Karl Rove, and Ben Carson. But we begin tonight with Trace Gallagher reporting from our West Coast newsroom on the Trump campaign and the changes there. Trace?
And Megyn, after weeks of saying a contested convention would be unfair, would have too much influence from party leaders, or could lead to riots, it appears the Trump campaign has done the math, realizes a contested convention is a strong possibility, and is now preparing to play ball in Cleveland. Today, Trump announced that one of his newest hires, lobbyist Paul Manafort, who has worked for several presidents, will now, quoting, oversee, manage, and be responsible for all activities that pertain to Mr. Trump's delegate process and the Cleveland convention. But critics say Manafort is going to be playing catch up to what many call Ted Cruz's effective ground campaign that by many accounts has already wooed several, if not dozens, of free agent delegates and delegates that would be unbound after the first convention vote. The Trump campaign is also shifting and expanding. First, reaching out to prominent GOP lawmakers in Washington looking for support, and now planning to hire some big names to help the campaign effort. But these high-profile moves come as the candidate himself is keeping a low profile. Donald Trump has cleared his schedule for the next few days, canceling a news conference in California and skipping the Colorado State GOP convention. In the past 48 hours, Trump's media omnipresence has also largely disappeared. The only scheduled interviews we could find was with Brian Kilmeade. The campaign says this is not an indication Trump is lacking energy, only that he's working hard to run his campaign and his multi-billion-dollar company. Megyn.
Trace, thank you. Well, our lead guest tonight is Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and author of the book Duplicity. Mr. Speaker, it's great to see you. I can't get enough of that. You know me.
I just love hearing you say it.
I can't wait to read it now.
There we go.
All right, so let's talk about this AP poll, which this is how they put it. They say for Americans of nearly every race, gender, political persuasion, and location, disdain for Donald Trump runs deep, saddling the Republican frontrunner with unprecedented unpopularity. I mean, when they're saying 70% of the country doesn't like him, and by the way, it's not much better for his rivals. Let's just start with Trump. What does that portend for this race and including the general election?
Well, you don't quite know. I mean, clearly it means that at some point in the near future, he's got to pivot and try to figure out messages and tactics that reach a lot more people. It could lead you, particularly because I think Secretary Clinton's numbers are pretty negative too. You could end up in one of these weird races where the least unpopular survives at the very end, which would not, I think, be healthy for the country. I'd rather have a positive race where you actually have ideas and a choice of two philosophies. But Trump clearly, look, I think it's actually good that he's off the trail for a couple of days. He had a particular shtick. It was amazing. It caught him from June the 16th to about 3 weeks ago. He should have hired somebody like Paul Manafort about 6 weeks ago. He's now finally beginning to take seriously the need to run a much bigger campaign. And I think in that sense, stopping, taking a deep breath, doing some planning is more important than the next 6 rallies in terms of whether or not he survives. He's at a real turning point in his campaign, and he's got to get this larger act together or he won't be competitive.
What do you make of the fact that the numbers got worse for him over the past, well, since February? So this poll had him about, I don't know, around 58% unfavorable back in July, and then still all the way through February, he was at 58% unfavorable. And then it jumped up 11 points to 69% unfavorable just as of late March into this early April period. So what was it? I mean, we're all talking about the Heidi Cruz tweet. Did it, the abortion? Like, what did that?
I think there were a series of things like that were mishandled. And I also think he had a particular technique of attacking, which worked very, very well up through Marco Rubio. But then there was a moment where people got tired of it, and he's been trying to use it on Cruz, and it doesn't work. I thought their statement that the Trump people put out after Wisconsin was exactly wrong. We have a tradition in America. If the other guy beats you fair and square, you're gracious. You say, Ted Cruz had a great night. Welcome to New York.
Mitt Romney did that with you when you won South Carolina.
Exactly. In fact, he called me and he said, you had a big victory here tonight. And I think that Donald would actually be better off to be a little more gracious. And I think he'd be very well off to stop and take seriously these polling numbers. Doesn't mean they can't change. Doesn't mean that the race is over. There was a 36-point swing for Ronald Reagan between March and the election. There was something like a 25-point swing for George H.W. Bush between May and the election of 1988. So you can have very big swings, but you don't get there by accident, and you don't get there by continuing to do the things that aren't working.
Right, because right now he's got everybody beating up on him. He's got Ted Cruz beating up on him, John Kasich, he's got these super PACs. Even Hillary, even though he's not the nominee yet, is releasing ads against him. And so he's sort of bloodied and bruised right now, but if he can get on message and just sort of stay on a sort of clean message, pro-Republicans and anti-Hillary or whoever, he'll do much better.
He'll do a lot better almost overnight if he shifts his messaging. And I think if he gives a series of major speeches. For example, if he gives a serious speech that's well thought out, much like the AIPAC speech was, on the kind of judges he would appoint, and if he has a set of names that the conservative leadership in this country can say, wow, that would be the right kind of people to replace Scalia, that's a building block back. It doesn't solve everything, but there are a series of speeches like that could actually bring him back a long way.
And fewer distractions where sort of these meandering down the mean tweet.
I think he ought to have, and I say this as somebody who's gotten himself in trouble occasionally with tweeting and everything else, I think it would be very healthy for Trump to have somebody else read all of his tweets before they go out.
I think you should hire Dana Perino. She's the best communications person in Republican politics. She could be the clearinghouse before he sends anything out. I want to ask you about.
I'll tell you what, if he announces Dana Perino's helping him, you'll know he's turned a corner.
and reaching out and broadening. I want to ask you about his rivals, because I mentioned at the beginning, Ted Cruz is viewed unfavorably by 59%. So only 10 points lower than Donald Trump, I guess better in this context. And 55% have negative views of Hillary Clinton. So she comes to New York today. This is her adopted home state. And this was her outreach to show she is a woman of the people, Mr. Speaker. There she goes. She's trying to get on the subway. She runs the Metro card. No. Try again. No. We've all been there. We've all been there, Madam Secretary. No. But does anybody believe that Hillary Clinton is taking the subway and that seeing her on the subway makes her real and we can, you tell me whether this affected politics.
The problem, the deepest problem Secretary Clinton has, and I've worked with her before, she's a very smart person. But the biggest problem she has is that she is authentically inauthentic. That she cannot do anything that's authentic because she calculates and she thinks, man, nobody believes Hillary Clinton is a woman of the subways.
Right. And we don't need her to be, right? It's like, who needs her to be?
One of Roger Ailes' great advice was to Richard Nixon in 1967 when he said to him, you have to learn to be who you really are on television because television doesn't let you lie. And he said, and the fact is, you're not going to be likable, but you can be respectable. People can decide in the middle of a war, you're the guy they respect to lead the country. And the whole Nixon strategy with television was built around realizing what his weaknesses were and then playing to his strengths. Hillary could come across as a serious, hardworking, practical person if she'd relax, but she wants to overreach. She wants us to believe she's all these things she's not.
Mm-hmm. And it's fine to be, we know she's a former First Lady, Secretary, so we know somebody else has been driving her. That's fine. That's a nice life. Most of us like to lead that life. We're not going to hold it against her. She doesn't go on the subway.
If I could charge as much per speech as she was charging, I wouldn't feel like I was going to use the subway very often.
Dare you darn tootin'. By the way, Roger Ailes said similar things to me. Not the part about being unlikable, but he also said that stuff to me about be your authentic self on television.
You have to be.
The viewers can spot
you
a
are
phony
more
from a mile away.
I want to reassure you, you're much more likable than Richard Nixon was.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, great to see you.
Thanks.
Well, some folks in the Bronx today shared a New York welcome for Senator Ted Cruz.
It's an immigrant community, Ted Cruz. It's an immigrant community, Immigrant community. If you're anti-immigrant,
Charles Krauthammer joins us next on that and what's next in this Republican race. Plus, the Obama administration is now arguing to give a whole list of benefits to the illegal immigrants known as Dreamers. We'll look at whether the Supreme Court is going to sign off. And then new fallout tonight after former President Bill Clinton gets into a shouting match with the Black Lives Matter movement. A hot Kelly file still ahead. Don't go away.
You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter. Tell the truth.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, because you get your Bronx visa. You're not allowed in the Bronx.
God bless you.
Get out of the Bronx.
It's an immigrant community, Ted Cruz. It's an immigrant community, Immigrant community. If you're anti-immigrant, you're not welcome here. We're at the forefront of climate change, Ted Cruz. We're at the forefront of climate change here.
So we're putting them down as a maybe. Breaking tonight from the campaign trail, Senator Ted Cruz gets a rather rough welcome from the Big Apple as he begins campaigning in New York. He heard those folks in the Bronx and also from Mr. Trump, who wanted to remind folks about Ted Cruz and New York values. Watch.
You know, Lion Ted Cruz came today. He couldn't draw 100 people. Do you remember during the debate when he started lecturing me on New York values like we're no good? And I've got this guy standing over there looking at me, talking about New York values with scorn in his face, with hatred of New York. So, folks, I think you can forget about him.
Joining me now, Charles Krauthammer, Fox News contributor and author of the book Things That Matter, now out in paperback. Charles, good to see you. And so, first of all, New Yorkers are just so colorful. I mean, they put it all out there. There's no ambiguity about how they feel about you, which is something we always love about them. And it doesn't seem like they're feeling the Cruz train right now.
No, I think that's the definition of a Bronx cheer, the reception he got in the Bronx. And I think what he ought to do is to examine to look at his advance team and to find the guy who picked that venue. It wasn't exactly very wise. Look, it was a fairly uncivil reception he got, but it's New York, it's loud, and it's allowed. That's called free speech. It was not. The problem with Cruz is he's coming off the Wisconsin win, and the definition of momentum is to keep it going. And I think it kind of stopped right in its tracks today in the Bronx, and with the Trump speech about New York values.
Mm-hmm. And now, Ted Cruz is basically saying, you forget about that stuff. I was really just talking about the really liberal politicians.
Look, I think he made what he did in that debate months ago was a classic case of what you would call a gaffe with a long fuse. There was a dozen ways in which he could have made that charge against Trump without using the adjective New York. Of course, it didn't hurt him in Iowa. I don't think it helped him in any way. But it was a huge mistake because one day he was going to end up in New York. Look, there is no way around that gaffe. You can try to explain it saying, well, I was talking about the politicians, but that's just not going to work. In fact, what he did in that debate is by saying New York values, he served up for Trump the opportunity for his strongest response in any of the 11 debates.
These guys were probably not thinking at the time that New York was going to be relevant in this race, but now it is very much. So let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
Because even if Trump gets over 50% in New York State, he doesn't necessarily win all the delegates here. You have to win each congressional district as well. So Ted Cruz could pick some off. And it looks right now like even if Trump has a great result in New York, and he's posed to with over 30 points in his favor, we're still likely headed for a contested convention. So with what we just talked about with Newt Gingrich about, Donald Trump has 69% of the American public having very unfavorable opinions of him. Ted Cruz has 59%, very unfavorable. How do you see this shaping up?
I think the best analysis right now would be to say that Trump has to win on the first ballot, that he is likely to be denied the nomination if it goes to multiple ballots, because he will only get weaker as the candidates, as the delegates are released from their obligations. I still think he has a reasonable chance to win on the first ballot. I would assume that if he got close, say within 50 or so, it would be like giving somebody a 3-foot putt. And that would be, it'd be a way to garner a few of the uncommitted delegates. But if he's, 100 away or more, and most importantly, if Cruz comes reasonably close, say 200 delegates behind, so it's not a huge gap. It's not like the gap between them and Kasich. Then I think that Cruz has a claim to legitimacy. After all, if neither gets the majority, if they both have a large plurality, with Trump perhaps ahead, but not prohibitively so, then I think each has a chance. Trump has to win, I think, on the first ballot.
What do you make of these general election polls that show, Trump versus Hillary? She's beating him in most of the polls by 10 points. She's also beating Cruz by about 3 points. Kasich's beating her, but he's so far behind, I don't know that that's relevant. The Cruz and the Trump people both say, just let me at her. Just once it's just me and her, don't worry, those numbers are going to flip.
Well, they could. I mean, historically, the numbers 5 months away, I think we are from the election, even longer, they will change dramatically. Reagan was way behind Carter in 1980. These things can change. The problem is that these candidates are very well known, certainly Trump, certainly Clinton, Cruz a bit less so. So that it isn't as if people haven't heard of them, haven't formed an opinion. The opinion is formed. So I think these are going to be perceptions that are going to be much harder to change than in the regular normal cycle.
Even with Trump coming out with a series of policy speeches and, we're hearing maybe sort of walking on a little bit more of a straight and narrow path.
Well, no, I think that would definitely help him. But I do think it will require, it's got to be sort of a character change, a persona change. Look, what got him here is his style. When you look at the exit polls from the Republicans who support him, tell it like it is, leadership, strength, all this stuff. But it's part of his whole shtick. Now, if he's going to change, he says, I can become presidential overnight, that would make a difference. But you wonder whether that's going to be seen as authentic. The speeches will help. He needs to put flesh on the bone. But people are going to ask themselves, is this really what he thinks? Or is he reading a speech that somebody else read? Because when you get him unawares, like in the question about abortion, he demonstrated that as of now, and at age 69, he apparently had never thought through the question of what do you do if it's illegal.
To your point about, he has to sort of change character. Rudy Giuliani, who came out today and said he's going to vote for Trump and he supports him, but he says it's not an endorsement, but I'm going to vote for him, says the man I know is not the man you see on television. He's a gentleman. He's a good father. Charles, good to see you.
My pleasure.
Up next, the college student being asked to give up an important campus gig, all because she dared to support Donald Trump with chalk. Plus, new fallout after Hillary Clinton is caught in a subway snafu with a ticket, well, a Metro card at least, that would not work. And then President Obama trying to convince the U.S. Supreme Court to give government benefits to the illegal immigrants in the country known as Dreamers. We'll take a look at whether this is going to work just ahead. From our Cupcake Nation file tonight, a classic. A group of students at the University of Tennessee now demanding the resignation of a student leader. What did she do? She expressed support for Donald Trump. Haley Puckett was popular enough to be elected to the Student Senate, but that was before she sent out the offending tweet about the pro-Trump chalk drawings she actually helped create at her school, saying she was actually proud of the work being done by her fellow Trump supporters. And now her fellow student leaders are letting her have it, calling for her to step down because she does not agree with them and their politics. Pro-Trump chalkings similarly offended some of the cupcakes over at Emory University. Chalk drawings, folks, and cupcakes with no understanding of the free speech principles on which this country was founded. Welcome to 2016. So the man credited for helping President George W. Bush win the White House today penned a new column for the Wall Street Journal on the road ahead in this Republican race. And joining me now with his magic whiteboard, Fox News contributor and former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, Karl Rove. Karl, good to see you. So you're sort of outlining what you've gleaned from Wisconsin. And can you tell us that in light of what we're also seeing now is likely to happen in New York?
Yeah, look, after Wisconsin, Donald Trump has 743 delegates, and the not Trump, that's Kasich and Rubio and Cruz and uncommitteds, and the miscellaneous delegates left in the hands of others, they total 897. So there's 154 delegate gap between where Trump is and where not Trump is. And I think Charles Krauthammer hit it right. Trump needs to win on the first ballot. Otherwise, he's going to start losing delegates. So far, his operation's done an ineffectual job of making certain that the second half of the process, first half of the process is apportioning the delegates through primaries and caucuses. Second half of it is actually getting the delegates elected at state conventions and district conventions. He done good on the first, 37% of the vote, 740 delegates. He not done good on the second one, and as a result, there are people who are today bound to Trump on the first or second ballot who are not going to be supporters of his after they're unbound. So he's got to go in with he's got a 154 delegate deficit right now. He's going to close up a bunch of that in New York. Some estimates are that he'll get 90 or 95, 90 out of 95. I'm not certain it's going to be that big given the way that the congressional districts are apportioned. In each district, if somebody gets 50%, they get all three. If they get less than 50% and somebody else gets more than 20, then it goes 2-1. And I think we're going to see some districts where Cruz and Kasich, primarily Kasich, are going to do better. But even if he gets all 95, that still means that he's about 60 delegates behind the not Trump forces, and he's got a lot of rough territory ahead.
But this guy, Paul Manafort, that he just hired, who seems to be very well respected, he knows what he's doing. Isn't his job now to shore up those delegates to say, you vote Trump, you stick with Trump. Even if you get freed up and you become unbound, you need to stick with him.
Yeah, well, look, we have elected of the 2,400 and some odd delegates to the National Convention. We have 832 left to select to apportion out through primaries and caucuses. We've got probably about 1,200 yet to vote on and to select out of state party conventions and district conventions. And it's awful late. And I mean, Paul Manafort is excellent. He did this in 1976 for Gerald Ford against Ronald Reagan under the direction of a young Houston lawyer named James A. Baker III. You may have heard of him later in life. And but it's awful late, and you need to have in place the infrastructure to actually make this happen. And all along, Donald Trump has not built the infrastructure inside these states.
I want to ask you about something else in your piece where you talked about how, look, you said that his temperament, Trump's temperament, had something to do with why he lost Wisconsin and could cost him the nomination. And the question is, if that's true, if Wisconsin was some harbinger of things to come, then why is he killing it in New York? Why does he still have solid poll numbers in virtually all the states that are coming up between now and June 7th?
Well, look, it's his home state. He better do well there. But look, he goes into Wisconsin and takes on the very popular Republican governor and says things that people in Wisconsin absolutely know are not true about him.
Okay, but my point is that that's an aberration, unless he does that in every other state.
Maybe, but remember, the Real Clear Politics average going into Wisconsin was 39-35. Cruz in front, but a close race. but it ended up being 48-35, a 13-point blowout. And I think it was because it was we ground to the end. People sort of said, "Wait a minute, you're saying and doing things that we don't think demonstrate what we want to see in presidential." And then he compounds it on election night with a concession statement that is jaw-droppingly dumb. Basically accuses his opponent, explicitly accuses his opponent of violating federal law, and makes a series of outrageous statements that I think Speaker Gingrich hit it right. That was the moment to be gracious. That was the moment to look like a president, not the moment to look like a angry and bitter and resentful loser. And that's what he came off as.
Karl Rove, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Joining us now with reaction, former Republican presidential candidate and Donald Trump supporter, endorser, Dr. Ben Carson. Good to see you, Dr. Carson. What do you make of that? Do you think that Trump's detractors are making too much out of the snarky statement he put out on the night of the Wisconsin loss?
Well, obviously they're going to make a lot of it. People are going to, depending on who they're supporting, they're going to see everything in either negative or positive light. And that's really the problem, because the Republicans, the conservatives, the people who think logically have to recognize that the stakes here are extraordinarily high, and they have to stop creating this tension between them so that people are going to say, "I'm not voting for that person no matter what."
But it's the nature of the primary process. I mean, you know how it's just so ugly between the candidates right now. You were once opposed to Donald Trump, and he came after you, and isn't that just the nature of the process? You can't stop that.
It would be nice if we stopped it, and if we could be mature. We
can't.
We get what we it seems like we can't. I know that we can, though. I know we have the intellectual ability to do it and to focus on the things that are important, and I think we ought to keep trying to do that.
Well, what do you think? When you were still in this race, one of the things that you always did very well on was likability and honesty and trustworthiness. And so is it possible to advise somebody on how to raise their likability, their favorables? How would you suggest that be done?
Well, first of all, it is interesting. I did have high favorables. People liked me, but they didn't vote for me. And Trump has horrible numbers, but they vote for him. So I don't know that there's a great correlation there, to be honest with you.
So maybe he shouldn't be listening to you. He should just be doing. And that is actually one of the core things, because Corey Lewandowski, his campaign manager, said to have put on the board, "Let Trump be Trump." That is the way forward for him. Don't have outside people who think they know better coming in there to massage this candidate who doesn't look anything like any other candidate. And because he's so unlike anything we've ever seen, he's gotten to this place in the race.
Well, I think you need the outside people, though. There's no question that he's got to up the ground game. He's got to cultivate the delegates. And if you don't play that part of the game, you're going to lose 100% of the time. So that was the right move to make.
Do you think that's stealing? Some people say that's stealing the vote, but the other argument is, well, those candidates, those delegates are unbound. When they switch, if they switch, it's only at a point at which, by the rules, they become unbound.
Yes, the rules are the rules. But, again, I can't emphasize strongly enough, we're about to go over the cliff, and we may not be able to get back. If we get a progressive in there and they get 2 of the 4 Supreme Court picks, America as we know it is gone. That's what people have to think about. So the Cruz supporters need to say, "I'm going to support Trump if he wins." The Trump supporters need to say, "I will support Cruz if he wins." Whoever the person is, they've got to support him. You've got to put aside your own little petty things and recognize that we're talking about the future of this country. We're talking about our children and our grandchildren. We somehow have got to get that through people's heads.
Great to see you, Dr. Carson. Thanks for being here.
You too. Thanks, Megan.
Some dramatic moments on the campaign trail today when Bill Clinton runs into a buzzsaw of protesters from the Black Lives Matter movement, and wow, he was not happy. Is this going to be a problem for the Clinton campaign? Surrogates from both the Sanders and the Clinton camps. Look, they're getting along fine now, but we'll see in 5 minutes. Stay tuned.
You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter. Tell the truth.
Well, Hillary Clinton traveled like a true New Yorker today. Sort of. when the Democratic presidential candidate was caught on camera making several failed attempts to properly swipe her Metro card. In her defense, she may have swiped it just right and it just didn't go through. That has happened to all of us. It eventually went through, and she managed to take the train for one full stop with a full security detail and a bunch of cameras while she was campaigning in the Bronx. That's just how we all do it. Trace Gallagher is live in our West Coast newsroom with one of those moments. Hey, Trace.
Just so you know, Megan, a few years ago, the New York Daily News reported that 80% of all MetroCard swipes at New York City subways are successful. And the primary reason the other 20% fail is because the ticket is damaged or defective. Hillary Clinton's MetroCard was neither. Yet it took her about 5 swipes to make it work, which took some credibility away from her statement claiming she loves the subway and that it's the best way to get around. Her lack of knowledge on the proper swipe technique also took a bit of the sting away from her slam at Bernie Sanders when he proved that he too does not hang with the strap hangers. Watch.
Hey, how do you ride the subway today?
What do you mean, how do you ride the subway?
How do you get on the subway today?
You got a token and you got it?
Wrong.
Wrong. The token was replaced by the MetroCard some 13 years ago, or as Hillary Clinton pointed out during her time as a New York senator. And while the media is covering the subway snafus, it's doing so in a lighthearted way. But think back 24 years to when George H.W. Bush seemed surprised by the technology of grocery store scanners. And the New York Times portrayed him as being out of touch with average citizens, saying, quote, some grocery stores began using electronic scanners as early as 1976, and the devices have been in general use in American supermarkets for a decade. The Times was later criticized for exaggerating Bush's lack of scanner knowledge, but at the time he was battling Bill Clinton and the recession, and the criticism had a lasting impact on the campaign. Megan.
I'm glad we've gotten to the bottom of that. Trace, thank you. 5 swipes, he tells us. 5. Hillary was not the only one facing critics today. Earlier this evening, her husband, the former president, had a furious exchange, furiously angry, with a couple of Black Lives Matter protesters. Watch this.
Oh! Now, wait a minute. Now you're screaming. So let's do another one. Whoa. No, wait. I want to deal with them all. Come on. No. Come on. Wait. See these other signs? This is what's the matter. I don't know how you would characterize the gang leaders who got 13-year-old kids hopped up on crack and sent them out onto the street to murder other African-American children. Maybe you thought they were good citizens. She didn't. You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter. Tell the truth.
Joining me now, Bernie Sanders supporter Nomiki Konst and Hillary Clinton supporter Melissa Mark Viverito. She's also the New York City Council Speaker. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, my goodness. So, I mean, in Hillary's defense, how many times have you swiped it properly and nothing?
Right.
Bupkis.
It happens.
I don't think we can indict the swiping, right?
The angle.
And sometimes if you don't use it for like a couple of weeks, then it doesn't work at all. You got to go back. You got to reactivate. She just doesn't live here. Well, she's campaigning. In any event, now that we've put Swipegate to the side, I ask you about the Bill Clinton exchange there, because that's a real issue that's going to come back to haunt Hillary. And tell us what it is, Nomiki.
Well, the issue here is that I think that Bill Clinton senses the presidency might be slipping away from Hillary Clinton, and it's also reeks of the desperation for him to hold on to his legacy.
But explain the fight that they were having. It was over something Hillary Clinton said, that black youth, that they're super predators. Back in 1996, she had a speech 20 years ago about violent crime.
This is about the crime bill, which Hillary Clinton acknowledges at this point was a mistake. She has a very comprehensive platform to really talk about criminal justice reform comprehensively in this country. She is the only candidate that vocally and consistently talks about systemic racism within the criminal justice.
But they're holding this against her. The Black Lives Matter group they're holding that speech against her and Bill Clinton's crime bill.
And it's a crime bill that Bernie Sanders voted for.
Well, she voted for it. Let's be fair.
So the issue here is which candidate has the most comprehensive approach to really dealing with the systemic issues that are disproportionately affecting communities of color.
Because that's
really at the bottom of it.
They were saying to her that she's basically put a bunch of African Americans in jail. Not Hillary personally.
1 in 4 African Americans.
But they believe that the crime bill did.
A bill which Bernie Sanders voted for.
He voted for that. Let's be very clear about. Let's be very clear about that. You understand legislation.
So,
you understand it.
yes,
You
I do.
understand you have to attach to bills other things. The Violence Against Women Act was attached to that crime bill. Every Democrat pretty much voted for that crime bill because the Clintons were triangulating. That's how legislation works. If you want Democrats to vote for
if
something,
both of the potential Democratic nominees
let me
supported it.
What we need to look at is what is the platform, what is the plan of action that these candidates are presenting.
I agree with that, but I'm just focused on why they're holding this against her and whether this is going to be an issue because they don't seem to care about looking
I think this is an issue that has been approached with all candidates, not just Hillary Clinton. And so again, the way that you come and confront that is by what is your plan of action? What will you do?
That's not true. When your
rhetoric does not. Let me ask you, Nomiki, because Bill Clinton, he was irritated there, right? I mean, that was obvious. And he feels that his crime bill is being misrepresented, and he's referring to super predators. He went on to say, look, there are gang leaders who got 13-year-old kids hopped up on crack and sent them out on the street to murder other African-American children. Maybe you thought they were good citizens. He's saying, but I did not. And that's where super predator came from. And
he's generalizing an entire African-American community where 1 in 4 African-Americans is imprisoned. May we make this very clear. They were imprisoned because this crime bill was lobbied by the private prison industry in which he accepted money from, and Hillary Clinton continues to. So what Bernie Sanders is doing right now, and what Black Lives Matter is doing right now, is they're connecting the dots. Voters are smart. You had your minute.
Let her finish.
The voters are smart. They understand that there's $5.5 billion in private prison stock rising because people are making money off of putting people in jail. And unfortunately, it's been targeted in the African American community, and it was a result of 90s legislation.
Go ahead,
so I am the Speaker of the New York City Council. I am a Latina who has been living in New York City since 1987. And Hillary Clinton has a relationship not only with the Latino community, but with the African American community that goes back to 20 years. This is not a new relationship. She's not learning our issues. She's not just talking.
That's condescending towards Bernie Sanders.
If I may. I have, as having been our senator in the state of New York, I understand firsthand what her platform is. We understand the district I represent here in New York City is a community that has been disproportionately impacted by criminal justice policies, which she will look to address at a systemic level nationwide.
The polls in New York on the Democratic side have tightened a bit. It's not the landslide, the lopsided thing that we're seeing with Trump and Cruz for Hillary and Bernie. But do you think there's any chance she loses New York to Bernie?
Not at all. Not at all. I know that the relationship that she has had with the state runs deep. As our representative,
it's called patronage.
She's stood strong.
It's called patronage.
As our
That's
representative, she stood strong with us after 9/11.
So, she's a U.S. senator. She walked into New York. She cut deals the way that Bill Clinton, when he was president. Everybody knows what New York is about. There's machine politics at the local level, and she's been able to oil that machine. Bernie Sanders is funding his campaign on $27 donations. What his movement is about is not about patronage. He's bringing in independents. He's bringing in first-time voters. He's bringing in people who want to challenge.
I don't know how things are going to get done.
Well, it's down to 10.
Gotta leave it at that. That was good. That's
passed more legislation than Hillary Clinton did.
I got it. Also tonight, what's going to happen with illegal immigrants and benefits? That's next. A developing controversy over an argument the Obama White House plans on presenting to the U.S. Supreme Court as the administration prepares to make the case that some folks in this country illegally are entitled to benefits like Medicare and Social Security, thanks to President Obama's executive order on immigration. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has more. James?
Megan, good evening. The momentous issues in the case of U.S. v. Texas, set for Supreme Court oral arguments about 10 days from now, involve the limits of presidential power. 26 states are challenging the executive orders President Obama signed in late 2014, unilaterally expanding the number of illegal aliens and their family members, up to 4 million of them in all, who can be shielded from deportation under a policy called deferred action. Receiving little attention until now, however, is a startling assertion tucked away in the Obama administration's court filings, namely that these protected foreigners, known as non-qualified aliens, can receive some of the same federal benefits U.S. citizens enjoy. In a Supreme Court brief filed last month, Mr. Obama's Solicitor General Donald Verrilli argued, and I quote, "A non-qualified alien is not categorically barred from participating in certain federal earned benefit programs associated with lawfully working in the United States, the Social Security, Retirement and Disability, Medicare, and railroad worker programs, so long as the alien is lawfully present in the United States as determined by the Homeland Security Secretary."
All of a sudden, the people who are here illegally, they wake up every day continuing to violate our nation's immigration laws, are being afforded in many cases more benefits than lawful citizens get.
At the time, the president promised his orders would not confer federal benefits on these undocumented workers.
It does not grant citizenship or the right to stay here permanently or offer the same benefits that citizens receive. Only Congress can do that.
Yet supporters of the president's immigration policy say the benefits do not mark new legal ground.
It's the president's decision to defer removal. And then after that, it's really what Congress has passed that kicks in to determine whether people who are here with that deferred action then get certain benefits or work authorization.
The vacancy created by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, of course, complicates the prospects for how the High Court will rule. A decision is expected by late June or early July. Megan?
James, thank you. An important thought after the break. April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Nearly 5 children die every single day in this country due to abuse and neglect. Every 10 seconds a report is made that a child is being abused. Millions of children are at risk, and it's too easy to look away. If you know someone in need, please call the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. If you are a child in need of help, 1-800-4A-CHILD. Also, childhelp.org. Thanks for watching.